Today I'll be showing you how to build a website from scratch. And I don't mean coding it from scratch. What I mean is installing the web server software on a server and installing your content management system of choice. In this video, I'm going to be using Apache as my web server and WordPress as my content management system since it's the de facto standard. Now, I've done this exact setup on a Google Cloud VPS running Ubuntu server, and that's what I'll be showing you in this video. So why would you want to do it this way as opposed to just signing up with a web host? Well, how much do you pay for web hosting? A few bucks a month, maybe even more? Or sometimes web hosting plans can get up to 10 or even 20 bucks a month on the high end. Well, how would you like to pay 10 bucks for an entire year just for your domain name and have it hosted for free in a data center where you don't have to worry about acquiring or maintaining extra hardware or electricity costs or anything like that? Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. I'll show you the exact options to choose when deploying your server in order to take advantage of Google Cloud's always free tier. Another advantage to building your website from scratch, other than big cost savings, is that you have complete control over your website and how it runs. For example, the CMS you use updates so that you always have the latest versions of all the software that runs your website. Even being able to add on additional services like your own mail server that you don't have to pay extra for, that uses your own domain, as well as your security practices, which I'll be incorporating that into this video and also discussing additional security tips for WordPress sites in my next video. But another security advantage of doing it this way is then you're not sharing a server with a bunch of other people, so you don't have to worry about some Yahoo putting up their site with a PHP exploit that goes down and affects the other sites, which, yes, has happened on shared web hosts. And also not having to deal with pesky web host restrictions, like your ability to install plugins and themes and customize your site how you like it and monetize it. It's basically your own virtual server. The sky is the limit. Now, this setup is suitable for individuals and small businesses who expect to be getting fewer than 1,000 hits a day on their site. Obviously, I would not recommend a big company do the exact configuration that I'm about to do, but the beauty of Google Cloud and the cloud in general is that you can easily scale this up to meet the needs of a larger organization, albeit for a higher cost. But with that said, let's deploy our Google Cloud instance and start building our website. All right, so now the first step is to go to the Google Cloud console by going to console.cloud.google.com. And then it'll prompt you to sign into your Google account if you haven't already. And if you've never used the Google Cloud Console before, then it'll prompt you to set it up. It'll ask you to agree to terms and conditions, and it'll also ask for a credit card. Yes, Google Cloud does require a credit card, even if you are using free tier resources, because they have to be able to bill you if you exceed free tier limits. And then it'll prompt you to create a new project. I've called my project drewowdentech-com. But then once you've done it, you're going to go to the navigation menu and then scroll down to the compute engine. That's what we're going to be focusing on in this video. Then we're going to go to VM instances. So now we're going to create a new instance. And for your first compute engine instance, it'll actually bring you to this page and prompt you to enable the compute engine API. You just enable the API and then come back to the compute engine and then VM instances, then it'll allow you to create your instance. So now I'm going to show you how to set this up so that it's free. To do this, I'm going to be following the free tier guidelines available in Google Cloud's own documentation, which I've used to set up my own VM instance. And I'll leave a link to this down in the description, which I'd encourage you to go check out if you're watching this in the future, just in case it's changed. But I'm going to show you how exactly to set that up. So now, first of all, you're probably going to want to change the instance name, and rather than have it be instance dash today's date dash blah blah blah. It's just good practice to always give things a meaningful name. I'm going to call this one demo-Drew-Tech. I've called my production use one www-Drew-Tech since it's principally used for serving web traffic. Now I'm just going to wipe this VM out and delete it after I'm finished with this video. So now when we come down to region, the 3 regions that fall under the free tier are US-West 1, US-Central 1, and US-East 1. It's kind of self-explanatory. All of those are in the US, specifically on the West Coast, in the middle, and on the East Coast, respectively. I've put mine on US-East 1, and it doesn't matter what zone you put this under. Now, when it comes to machine type, this is actually the most critical one to get right. So, you're going to pick a general purpose VM. You're going to select from the E2 series. And then you're going to come down to machine type. You're going to use a preset one. And then you're going to set this to E2 micro. And then we're going to come to OS and storage, and we're going to have to change this. So first things first, I'm going to change the operating system to Ubuntu, not Ubuntu Pro, since that actually costs money. We're just going to select Ubuntu Standard. We are going to be attaching this to our own personal Ubuntu Pro subscription so that we can get Livepatch, but don't do it through Google Cloud. Otherwise, they will charge you for it. But going with Ubuntu is free. And under version, I would select the latest LTS version and make sure you're selecting the x86/64 image, not the ARM64, so that you get access to the most packages. I'd recommend staying away from using short-term intermediary releases and only use long-term support versions. And this is especially true when we're talking about a server, because long-term support versions, as the name suggests, are supported for much longer. They're generally more stable, and they have a lot more community support, which for a newbie is going to be a big help, because we're talking about a command line interface here. And you'll see that this was built very recently. Google Cloud is constantly keeping their images up to date because people are constantly launching these things. So when we actually deploy this, we will have very few, if any, updates, though you will check for updates just in case. Now, when it comes to boot disk type, this is very important. If you want it to be free, change balanced persistent disk to standard persistent disk. This is something that gets a lot of people. As for size, you can go up to 30 gigabytes, and then select that. And we can double check our configuration here. It should say new standard persistent disk. Make sure it's not balanced persistent disk, and size is 30 gigabytes. Any more than that, and you will be charged for it. And make sure license type is free. If it's paid, then you've selected the wrong image. And for this video, we're going with Ubuntu 24.04 LTS Minimal, which is the latest LTS release at the time of shooting this video. I would strongly suggest going with the minimal one for a micro instance, because this is what we're working with in a micro instance. Not much. One shared CPU core and 1 gigabyte of RAM and 30 gigabytes of disk space. Not much. So you want this to be as minimal as possible. So now we come to data protection. we've got to set this to no backups because snapshots and backups are not included in Google's free tier. And then when we come to networking, the most important thing to do is make sure you allow HTTP and HTTPS traffic. And then we're going to set a host name for this. This should be a fully qualified domain name. And by the way, a fully qualified domain name consists of host name, and then domain name, and then top level domain. For example, I set mine to www.drewhowdentech.com. That's what a fully qualified domain name looks like. And I went with www because this is going to be used for serving web traffic, and that's the convention for web servers. Now for this video, I'm going to be using www.demo.drewhowdentech.com, and for this video and the other videos in this series, I'm just going to pretend that demo.drewhowdentech.com is my root domain, and that this is my fully qualified domain. Since I'm not buying a second domain just to make a video, I think that's silly. Now for this, it doesn't really matter if you've bought a domain or not. If the domain you pick just happens to be taken, you can always change this later. So now we're going to come down to the network interface and then come to external IPv4 address. By the way, you can ignore internal IPv4 address. We're not going to be worrying about internal IPs in this video, since internal IPs are basically useless for our purposes. Well, we're going to be worrying about external IP address. So come down to external IP address, and first of all, we're going to change the network tier to standard to allow us to send up to 200 gigabytes out to the internet every month. Unlike with premium tier, which will only allow 1 gigabyte a month on the free tier. And now once we've done that, we're going to come to external IPv4 address, and then we're going to reserve a static external IP address. And the free tier does include a free static or dynamic IP as long as it's in use by your VM. And this is so that we don't have to worry about our IP address changing and then having to update our DNS records or any of that business. So you're just going to have to give it a name. I would pick the same name as what you gave your instance. In my case, demo-drewhowdentech. And then click reserve. And then this is why we set our network service tier before reserving our external IP, because once you reserve the external IP, that is tied to your network service tier. Now, if you've already registered a domain name and verified it in Google Search Console, we can create a public DNS PTR record, which should be the same as your host name, by checking enable for IPv4. And then this is what's going to be returned when you do a reverse lookup for our IP address. So in my case, I'm going to set this to www.demo.drewhowdentech.com. But anyway, once this all looks good, we're going to click done. So now the final step is to come to security, then scroll down to manage access. And then you're going to add a manually generated SSH key. So now let's go generate an SSH key. By the way, since I'm on Linux, I'm going to be using the terminal to generate my SSH key and SSH into my instance. But if you're on Windows, then you can use an application called PuTTY to accomplish this. But anyway, I'm going to do an ssh-keygen, which will then generate a SSH public/private key pair. And then you can either change where to save your SSH key or use the default location. I would save it in your .ssh directory under your home directory. And then I would suggest setting a passphrase for your private key, and then it'll generate your SSH key. So now if we come into our home directory and then show hidden files if you haven't already, we're going to go into our .ssh folder, and then we're going to go into our id.pub file. Not this one, that's the private key. You're going to go with the .pub one, and this is where our public key is stored. So you're going to copy that and then paste it here. All right, now we're done with that. Now don't worry about this monthly estimate here. Unfortunately, Google Cloud gives no indication that this will be free. However, assuming you've set up all the right options for your first micro instance, then you'll see a discount equivalent to your usage, which will zero out your costs as long as you're within free tier limits. And if this is your first time using Google Cloud, then you get $300 worth of free credits to spend over 90 days, which will then allow you to make sure that your usage is covered by the free tier before your free trial ends. But anyway, you can go double check your settings to make sure that you've set everything correctly, and then click create. And then Google Cloud is going to start the process of deploying your new VM. This will take anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes. So it's actually pretty quick, but just know that it's not an instantaneous thing. All right, and look at that, our VM is deployed in the time that you've been listening to my voice. Now, if you haven't registered a domain, but tried to set your PTR record anyway, then it would have given you an error. And just for clarity, the PTR record is not the same as your host name. So now we get to the step where we register a domain. I would recommend going with Cloudflare Registrar at domains.cloudflare.com. And then you basically just search for the domain you want. And then if it's available, then it'll allow you to register it. Essentially, just like any other registrar. The reason why I go with Cloudflare Registrar is because they offer at-cost domains, meaning that they don't have any markups on the domains they sell, meaning that you only pay what the registry for that particular top-level domain charges, VeriSign in the case of .com, and they also offer Whois privacy protection and DNSSEC free of charge, which, in case you're unfamiliar, Whois privacy protection will essentially hide your personal data, like your email address, physical address, and phone number from the public Whois database. And DNSSEC is a feature that will cryptographically sign your DNS records to protect against DNS spoofing attacks. Now, if the top-level domain that you want isn't available with Cloudflare, which is the case with a lot of country code top-level domains like .ca, then Porkbun is a great alternative that also offers at-cost domains. So now you're going to basically register a domain. It'll prompt you to create an account if you haven't already, once you pick out your domain, and then this will also require a credit card, obviously. And then once you've registered your domain, it'll take you to your Cloudflare dashboard, and then we can see your newly registered domain here. We just click on that, and then we can go to our DNS records. So now I'm going to quickly show you how I have it set up. So basically, I've created an A record for my root domain, pointing to my external IP for my VM instance. And then I've set the proxy status to DNS only because I am not using Cloudflare's DNS proxy. If you enable this, then Google Cloud will actually charge you for carrier peering, which is not included on the free tier. Now, per gigabyte, it's cheaper than using premium tier, but it's just something to be aware of. And then another record I've also set up is one for www. I've set it up as a CNAME record to my root domain. And this is so that you can punch in either drewhowdentech.com or www.drewhowdentech.com and get to the same site. And this is important because some people will add a www. Now, as to whether your site should be just yourdomain.com or www.yourdomain.com, doesn't matter, it's up to you. And again, I've set that to DNS only for reasons I just mentioned. And of course, I have other records here, which will be relevant later in the series once I get to my mail server setup. But for now, I'm going to add a couple new DNS records. First of all, I'm going to add an A record for a new subdomain, demo.drewhowdentech.com. For this video, I'm just going to pretend that this is my root domain. And then we're going to come back here, copy our external IP, paste it here, then turn the proxy status off so that you don't get carrier peering charges. And you can leave the time to live default. And then save it. And then I'm going to add a new record, this time a CNAME record, for www.demo.drewhowdentech.com. And then for the target, I'm going to put demo.drewhowdentech.com. And then again, turn the proxy off. And the reason why I use a CNAME record is so that if your IP address ever changes for whatever reason, say you're switching network service tiers or you're switching VPS providers, then you only need to update your IP address in your DNS records once. Now we're going to create that record. And now the reason why I don't do this the other way around is because you can't have a CNAME record on your root domain. It just doesn't work. Now, if you set this up with Cloudflare, they'll do something called CNAME flattening, which will convert your CNAME to an A record that points to the same IP address as your target domain so that you can do either or and have it work fine. But just note that that doesn't work with all DNS providers. This way is the most correct, and it'll work with any registrar or DNS provider. And then the CNAME record will also give our server a fully qualified domain name. And by the way, if you want to create a record on your root domain, just use the @ symbol for your root domain. And if you have an IPv6 address, which we don't in this video, then just set the type to quadruple A and then punch in your IPv6 address. So now that that's done, once you've purchased your domain, then you need to verify it in Google Search Console by going to search.google.com/search-console. And then it'll prompt you to enter your domain, and then it'll walk you through verifying domain ownership. Then once you've done that, you can set a PTR record on your VM after deployment by simply clicking on your VM, then clicking Edit, and then scroll down to Network Interface, click on our Only Network Interface, and then enable Public DNS PTR record, and then type in your fully qualified domain name, which in my case is www.demo.drewhowdentech.com. And again, this has to be verified in Search Console for this to work. And then click Save. You can verify this is set by doing NS lookup, and then our external IP. And then as we could see, yep, name equals www.demo.drewhowdentech.com. So now once we've done that, we can now SSH into our server by opening up a terminal, or using the PuTTY application if you're on Windows. And by the way, you can also SSH from the web. However, I find the web interface is very slow and cumbersome, so I would prefer to work from the terminal application instead. But anyway, I'm going to do SSH demo.drewhowdentech.com. And then first time connecting, it's going to say that it doesn't know our VM. We're going to type yes, then hit enter to connect anyway. Then enter the passphrase for your SSH private key, and now we're in. So now anytime we set up a Linux server, the first thing we always do is check for updates with sudo apt update. And oh, it has some updates to install. Well, I'll get everything updated now with sudo apt upgrade. And then hit yes to install these updates. Now, this will be very quick because, first of all, their data center will have a very fast internet connection. And like I said, there's going to be very few, if any, updates to begin with, because Google Cloud is constantly keeping their images up to date because people are constantly launching these things. And as we could see, it's already done before I could even finish speaking. So now the next thing to do is configure automatic updates by doing sudo nano /etc/apt/apt.conf.d/50 the unattended -upgrades. Okay, so now since it's a very minimal install of Ubuntu, it'll say that the nano command is not found. And so we're going to install it with sudo apt install nano. You can use vi or vim. I don't really like it. I think it's kind of cumbersome, especially for new users, so I prefer to use nano. But anyway, once we've installed our text editor of choice, it's in my case nano, we can do the command we were trying to do before, sudo nano /etc/apt/apt.conf.d/50 unattended -upgrades. Okay, now we're in. And by the way, I'll have a full list of all the commands in the description. So now first thing we're going to do is uncomment the updates and backports lines by removing the double slashes preceding them, and don't uncomment proposed since those are essentially pre-release updates. You probably don't want those on a production system. And also uncomment this line, auto fix interrupted dpkg, so that then it'll attempt to fix any errors, if any come up. And those are the only lines that we need to edit. So then hit Control X, then hit Y, then hit Enter to save our file. And then we've got to restart the unattended upgrade service with sudo systemctl restart unattended -upgrades. Pretty much anytime you edit a configuration file, you gotta restart the affected service for your changes to actually take effect. So now we're at the part of this video where we attach this to a Ubuntu Pro subscription so that we can take advantage of Canonical's Livepatch service, which will apply Linux kernel updates that would normally require a reboot without having to reboot the system, which will minimize our downtime to basically next to nothing. To do that, go to ubuntu.com/pro, then hit Get Ubuntu Pro Now, and this subscription is going to be for yourself, which is free for up to 5 machines. Just make sure it says free, should by default, then hit register. Now you're going to have to create a Ubuntu One account in order to use this service, which it's free on up to 5 machines. You just need to create an account. Pardon me while I do that. I'm basically just going to create a throwaway account so then I don't have to bother blurring out the token or any of that business. And I'll just delete this after I'm done with this video. Alright, and then once you've logged in or created your account, then it'll bring you to your Ubuntu Pro dashboard where you get your token. All you have to do to attach your instance is just copy this command and paste it in your instance terminal, and then it'll go enable Ubuntu Pro. And as we could see, Canonical's Livepatch service is enabled. And by the way, don't worry about real-time kernel. That's more for specialized use cases. So now, the next step, once we've taken care of setting up automatic updates and live patching, is to make sure our hostname is set properly. We can check our hostname by using the hostname command, and this should be set to your fully qualified domain name. We can do this by doing sudo hostname ctl hostname, and then our fully qualified domain name, which in my case is www.demo.druadentech.com. And then we can check this again by using the hostname command, and yep, sure enough, our hostname is www.demo.druadentech.com. So now the next step is to create a swap file, which is not done by default on Google Cloud's instances, but for a micro instance is almost essential, in my opinion, because if we use the free command, this is what we're working with in a micro instance, a single gigabyte of RAM. Not much. So having a swap file is going to be a big help. To create a swap file, we're going to do sudo fallocate -l, and then pick your size. I'm only going to give it 1 gig. No sense in creating a giant swap file thinking you'll get more RAM. Swap files don't work that way. This just helps to offset the memory usage. And then /swap file. Like that. Okay, so now we've created our swap file. The next step is to do a sudo chmod 600/swap file so that we have more secure permissions on it. This will make it so that way only the root user can read and write our swap file. So now the next step in order to enable our swap file is to do sudo mkswap/swap file in order to set up this swap file as swap space. And then we can turn it on by doing sudo swap on/swap file. And then we can check that it's on by doing the free command again. There we go, 1 gigabyte of swap space. So now, in order to make it so that our swap file is automatically enabled at boot time, we need to edit our fstab file with sudo nano/etc/fstab, and then come down to the bottom, and then you're going to add a line that says /swap file tab none tab swap tab sw tab 0 tab 0. And then once you're done that, it should look something like this. Note that I put 2 zeros on purpose, and then hit Control X and then Y and then enter to save and close the file. So now after all that, we finally get to the meat of this video, which is actually setting up this instance as a web server. To do that, we're going to install what's called a LAMP stack, which refers to the 4 most commonly used applications on a web server: Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Now, in the past, I would have used the taskcell command to do this easily. Unfortunately, the LAMP server task is deprecated, so that method is no longer usable. So we've got to do our LAMP stack the manual way by copying and pasting this really long command, which I'll have in the description. What this will do is this will install Apache, MySQL, and PHP, along with the various PHP modules that are required by Apache, MySQL, and WordPress. Then hit enter. It's going to install a whole bunch of new packages. Hit yes to install these. And then this will take a little bit, but honestly, thank goodness for Google's wicked fast internet, which greatly reduces our download times. All right, now that will actually take a while, but once that's finally done, we can come back into our web browser and then go to our website. Right, and for right now, we don't have an HTTPS site. We will fix that in a moment, but for now, we'll just continue to the HTTP site, and then if all went well, we should see our Apache default page. So now, once we've done that, the next step is to obtain an SSL certificate so that our website supports HTTPS, which is absolutely essential in 2025. Now, before we can do that, first of all, we gotta edit our site configuration a little bit by doing sudo nano /etc/ Apache2 /sites -available /000-default.conf. Then you're basically just going to add a couple lines to the file. First of all is server name, which can be either yourdomain.com or www.yourdomain.com. In my case, I'm going to use the www.url. So in my case, www.demo.drewowdentech.com. And then we're going to set a server alias, which is the other version of the address, which in this case, the non-www URL. So demo.drewowdentech.com. For clarity, you can flip-flop this either way. It doesn't matter. And by the way, if you come up to server admin, I'm just going to leave this as is for this video, but in a production environment, I would actually change this to be your business email address. And that's so that if your site experiences a server error, then it'll show an email address where people can contact you to notify you about the problem. But anyway, once we've done that, we're going to hit Control X, then Y, then Enter to save and close the file. And now the next step is to test our new configuration for errors by doing sudo apache ctl-t. Okay, syntax okay. So now we can apply our changes with sudo systemctl restart apache 2. Now we can obtain our SSL certificate. We can obtain a free SSL certificate from Let's Encrypt, which is a non-profit organization that issues free domain validation SSL certificates. To obtain a certificate, we're going to be using certbot. The instructions on how to do this are available at certbot.eff.org. Then we can get our instructions by scrolling down to here and saying that my website is running Apache on Linux with snap in brackets, because since we're on Ubuntu, we're going to be using the snap version. Now, I'm not going to go over how to obtain a wildcard certificate in this video, but if you want a wildcard certificate, then just click wildcard here and then follow the instructions. And by the way, in case you're unfamiliar, a wildcard certificate has your root domain and then a star.yourroot domain on the certificate. And that allows for your root domain, and the star allows for any subdomain to validate with your certificate. Yeah. Again, I'm not going to go over how to do that in this video since that process is a lot more cumbersome. I'm just going to go over how to obtain a standard certificate. Again, the instructions are available on this website, but I'll go over how to do that quickly. So first of all, we got to install certbot with sudo snap install --classic certbot. And by the way, the --classic option is important for certbot to work properly. And now the next step to complete the installation is do sudo ln-s/snap/bin/certbot /usr/bin/certbot. All right, so now we get to the part where we actually obtain our certificate by doing sudo certbot --apache, and then it'll ask us for an email address. I'm going to type my YouTube email here for my demo, but this should be a valid email address. Note that you can't use your domain as your email address just yet because we haven't set this up as an email server. I'll go over how to do that in another video, but then we're gonna hit enter, then hit Y to agree to the terms of service, and then hit no to opt out of the EFF's mailing list. And then it should list both your root domain and your www subdomain. If it doesn't, then you got to go back into your Apache default site configuration file and then set up your server name and alias as shown. But if it looks good, then just hit enter, and then it should go get a certificate for both your root domain and your www domain, which is important so that both your root and www domains will work fine without giving out any errors. And then it'll automatically obtain and install our certificate for us, and then that's valid for 90 days. And then it should automatically renew our certificate every 60 to 90 days. To make sure that that's working, just do sudo certbot renew --dry -run, and yep, it should say all simulated renewals succeeded. And we can check that our auto renew is working by doing systemctl list -timers, and then we should see the snap certbot renew timer in here, and that's how we know that that's working. So now if we go back to our site, we should automatically be upgraded to the HTTPS version. Once you verified this, then we're going to make a couple changes to our configuration file. You're going to come back to your terminal and then do sudo nano /etc/apache2 /sites-available /000-default-le-ssl.conf to get into the configuration file for the HTTPS version of your site. And as you can see, it automatically has your certificate configured by certbot. So now you're going to create a new line and then copy and paste this line from the description, and this will enable a feature called HSTS, or Hypertext Strict Transport Security. This basically tells any web browser that visits your site to always connect to your site over HTTPS and refuse to connect to any non-secure version of your site. And this is important to help prevent man-in-the-middle attacks. So now let me explain what each of these does. So max age makes it expire after 1 year, which is the convention, and includes subdomains will force all subdomains to use a secure connection as well. Because if you ever set up any other subdomains, certainly you are going to put those on HTTPS too. Right? Now, only do this once you've tested your site and you're sure that HTTPS is working properly. So now once you've added that line, just hit Control-X, Y, then enter to save and close the file, and then do a sudo apache ctl-t to test our configuration file. Oh, now in order for that new line to work properly, we've got to enable the headers Apache mod with sudo a2n mod headers, like that. And now that we've enabled that mod, we can test our Apache configuration again. Yep, syntax okay. Now just restart Apache with sudo systemctl restart Apache 2. Okay, and this is a good example of why we always test our Apache configuration before we actually restart Apache, because if we just blatantly restarted Apache, then it would have failed to start and taken our whole website down, which is fine at this stage because we don't actually have a live website yet, but once you've finished developing your site and you're doing this in a production environment, that can actually have some very serious consequences. So now I like to just test my site once more and make sure that, yep, we are getting to the default page over HTTPS. So now the next step before we can install WordPress is to configure MySQL. The first step in that is to secure our MySQL installation with sudo MySQL _secure _installation. And then it'll run the MySQL script to secure the installation. So validate password component, yes. And then I recommend a strong password policy by typing 2 for strong, then hitting enter. Remove anonymous users, yes. Disallow root login remotely, yes. Remove test database and access to it, yes. Reload privilege tables, yes. That was pretty quick. Now that we've done that, we can actually set up a database and user for WordPress by doing sudo MySQL. And now we can create a database with create database. I'm going to call it WP data, add a semicolon on the end, then hit enter, then create our WordPress user with create user, WP user at localhost, identified by, then put a password for your WordPress user in quotes. And this is where you need to have a good password, because if you don't, well, that's how you get hacked. So this should be a strong password. Now for my demo, I just put in a very wimpy one, but in a production environment, this really should be a password manager generated password. And then just don't forget the semicolon at the end, then hit enter. And again, I'm just going to completely wipe this instance after I'm finished with this video, so don't even bother going after this instance. And now the next step is to grant all the privileges on the WP data database to the WP user with grant all privileges on WP data .star to WP user at localhost. Make sure to put the semicolon there at the end, then hit enter. Now we can exit out of here by typing exit. You don't need a semicolon at the end of that. Now we get to the part where we actually install WordPress. To do that, first of all, switch to your website directory with cd, and by default that's /var/www/html. And now the first step is to remove our test page with sudo rm index.html. Otherwise, it'll bring up our default page instead of WordPress when we go to install WordPress. And now we can download WordPress with sudo wget wordpress.org/latest.tar.gz. Okay, and now if we do an ls, we can see that now we have latest.tar.gz in our website directory. We can unpack that with sudo tar xf latest.tar.gz. Okay, now we do another ls, and we can see that now we have a folder called WordPress that contains our WordPress installation. So then your website will be yourdomain.com/WordPress, which is not what you want. We want this on the meat and potatoes of our website. We can do that with sudo mv WordPress/star space dot, then hit enter. And then if we do another ls, now we have all our WordPress files at the root of our website directory. And now we can delete the WordPress directory with sudo rmdir WordPress. And by the way, you can also delete that latest.tar.gz file with sudo rm latest.tar.gz. And now if we do another ls, those files should be gone. So now the next step before we can install WordPress is to change the ownership of all these files to our web server user by doing sudo chown dash capital R, and capitalization matters here, www-data www-data space dot. Then hit enter, and now if we do an ls-la, we should see that our directory and all the files under it are owned by the www-data user and group. And this is important to ensure that WordPress can actually read and write the files in here. So now we can actually install WordPress by going to our site. And now this is where you need to decide if you want the www URL or the non-www URL to show in the address bar when a user visits your site. You can do either or here, but once that's set, you gotta stick with it, because to search engines, www.yourdomain.com and yourdomain.com are two different sites. So if you want the address in the address bar to be www.yourdomain.com, you can do that like so, but it's important that you type what you want here, because whatever you put in the address bar at the time of installation is what's going to show for your users when they go to visit your site. And by the way, either your www or non-www URL will still both work, which is exactly what we want. But anyway, now we're going to select our language. I'm going to go with Canadian English because I'm in Canada. Then hit continue. And now it'll ask for our database configuration. So our database name is WP Data. Username is WP User. And then our password is that super strong password that we set up, which I really hope is not this if you're doing this in a production environment. And database host and table prefix you can just leave as is, then hit submit. And if you did that right, then you should get to this screen where you can run the installation. And this is the part of the installation where I would suggest you hurry up, because your site is completely wide open when it's in this state. So for site title, you can just put the name of your site. I'm going to call this Drew Howden Tech Demo Site, because I'm setting this up for demonstration purposes. Pick a username. I would recommend anything other than root, administrator, or admin, because those are the most commonly targeted usernames. And so do something other than that. Do not use admin as your username. And then password, you can either use the password that WordPress generates for you, or you can set a new one, preferably something generated by a password manager, and then type in your email address. And now for my demo, I'm going to discourage search engines from indexing this site, because this is just a demo site, but I would recommend you leave this unchecked, because you probably want your website being found in search engines. But anyway, now just double check all this, and then click install WordPress. All right, now that WordPress is installed, we can log in with our username and password, and then we can click Remember Me. And by the way, now if we visit our site, as you can see, we can type in either www.demo.drewhowdentech.com or just demo.drewhowdentech.com and get directed to our www URL. And as we could see, our site is live. Now there's a couple post-installation steps that we got to take before we can go to town and build our site. First of all is come to the Updates tab. And as we could see, WordPress will automatically keep itself up to date. But if there are any updates, then make sure to install those. So now it's also going to show us updates for plugins, which actually, speaking of which, if we come to our plugins, I would remove any plugins that you don't need by either clicking delete on them individually, or we can select multiple and then delete those in bulk. You don't want any unused plugins on your website, because then that's extra code that you have for no reason, which could introduce security vulnerabilities. Like, the more plugins you have, the more it increases your attack surface. So that's why I recommend having as few plugins as possible. In fact, 96% of WordPress exploits come from plugins. That's right. The vast majority of WordPress exploits don't come from WordPress core. They don't even come from themes. They come from plugins. So make sure that you only have the plugins that you absolutely need and that you're actually using installed. And besides, the more plugins you have, the more it'll slow down your site due to the additional overhead. And this is especially true on this little bitty micro instance. And also make sure you enable automatic updates on all the plugins you have, as that doesn't happen automatically for whatever reason. Now, if you come into the Appearance tab, we can see that it comes with a few themes, with the latest WordPress theme being the active one. I would remove any themes that you're not using. Again, decrease your attack surface and enable auto updates on your active theme. And I'm preaching auto updates because updates patch security vulnerabilities. And that's especially essential on an internet-facing server to keep all the software up to date. Do you really want to be having to go in every so often and check for updates? No, this is 2025. Let the server do it for you. The WordPress team is very good about patching security vulnerabilities as soon as they're discovered, but you can only benefit from that if your site is kept up to date. But anyway, now that I've got that out of the way, there's just one more change that we're going to want to make to our Apache configuration file. And let me explain that. If you go to Settings, Permalinks, you might want to use Hostname as your permalink structure. If we do this with the default settings, and then, for example, if I go to the theme editor, it will actually break a lot of the core functionality of our WP admin panel, like to the point where we effectively can't make any changes to our website. Luckily, we can fix that. So come back to your instance terminal, do sudo nano /etc/apache2/apache2.conf. Yes, it's a different configuration file this time. And then this is a pretty big one, but we're gonna scroll all the way down to about here, where we see the directory /var/www line. And then within that, find the allow override line, and then replace none with file info, exactly like that. Then hit Control-X, Y, and then enter to save. And then do another sudo apache ctl-t. Make sure that our syntax is okay. And then restart Apache with sudo systemctl restart apache 2. And now if we come back to our site editor, we'll notice that it's fixed now. So the next thing we might want to do, if you come to Tools, Site Health, then go to Info, and then Server, we can see that our maximum upload size is 2 megabytes. And we can see that if we go to the Media tab, and then go to Add a Media File, that'll only allow us to upload up to 2 megabytes. This is very small, so you might want to increase that. To do that, come back into our terminal, then do sudo nano /etc/php / your version, which you can have auto-populate by hitting the tab key, 8.3 at the time of making this video, apache2 /php.ini to get into our php.ini file. Now this is a very long configuration file, but you're gonna scroll way down to File Uploads, and then find the Upload Max Size line, and then change 2M to your desired size. For this micro instance, I like to set it to 25 megs. That should be good enough. If you're uploading larger stuff, then feel free to change this at will. The next step is to come back up to Post Max Size, and then I like to set this to a smidge above upload max size, 26 megs in my example. And by the way, limiting the size of file uploads and post requests is important to mitigate DOS attacks or denial of service attacks, so that bad actors can't just spam your site with way oversized post requests and take up your resources. But anyway, then you're going to hit Control X, Y, and then enter to save. And then we got to restart Apache once more. Now, if we refresh our site health info page, then come back to server, we could see that upload max file size is 25 megabytes and post max size is 26 megabytes. We can confirm this by going to media and then add media file. Yep, maximum upload file size is 25 megabytes. That would be especially helpful if you're importing data from another WordPress site. But anyway, that's it for this video. You can feel free to edit your theme, or add a new theme if you like, install whatever plugins you need, write whatever pages you want, basically go to town from here. What I've done for my site is I've essentially just taken the latest pre-installed WordPress theme, 2025 at the time of shooting this video, and just use that as a starting point. If you go into your theme editor, there is a ton of options to customize your site as you see fit. Now, in my next video, I'll be going over some tips to secure and optimize your site. So stay tuned. Also stay tuned for my video after that, where I'll show you how to install and configure a basic email server on your instance so that you can send and receive email using your own domain. In the meantime, be sure to hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, share it with your friends, all that good stuff, and see you next time.